Hello everyone, and welcome to Hill Street. Today's story is, I don't want to do it, but I'm afraid of what happens if I don't, by Glitter Pickle 420. If you end up enjoying this story, please leave a like, and if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street, and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. Now, let's get to this nightmare. I've lived here for 15 years now. I'd leave if I could, but I'm not sure what would happen if I did. I bought this old house because it was big and cheap. It was built in the 1850s, and I was drawn in by the original details. The hand-carved wood trim and the gaslight on the banister of the grand staircase sold the house to me before the agent could even try. Once we moved in, we started working on fixing little things and hiring contractors for the bigger jobs. The home inspection went surprisingly well for such an old home. Most of the work that was needed was in the old stone wall basement. The inspector pointed out that there was a well and a cistern in the basement. He mentioned that the well was about 10 feet deep to the water line, and he had no real way of knowing how deep the water was. But it didn't matter anyways. We were going to put a floor over it and make the section a closet or something to avoid any accidents. The cistern was about 4 foot by 10 foot and somewhere around 4 foot deep. It was made from brick and still had pipes leading into it, but it had been disconnected almost 100 years ago when the original owners installed indoor plumbing. The inspector said it was bone dry and likely not going to cause me any issues, but it would be expensive to remove. Shortly after moving in, we hired a local handyman, Ted, to cover the well and fix a few other issues in the basement. He was the first to go missing. I remember it well. I felt sick and decided to leave work early. I came home and the house had a damp smell about it, like wet lumber mixed with old dirt. I shouted down the steps to see if Ted was still working in the basement. No response. I didn't suspect anything. I thought that I might be getting ripped off by a contractor, taking longer breaks than he should. But that was the worst thing it could be. But when I went downstairs, I immediately knew something was wrong. The cistern was full of water, and the floor between the well and the cistern was wet. It looked like a wet blanket had been pulled across the floor, down into the well. I thought Ted had fallen down the well. I called 911, and they spent 2 days looking for him. He wasn't in the well, and he never went home. Suddenly I was a suspect in a homicide. My story checked out, and I was never formally charged, but that didn't mean things didn't change. Everyone in town thought I was a murderer. I eventually lost my job and had threats against me and my family. But this was just the start of my problems. 6 months later, a friend of my son's also went missing. He told his parents that he was walking to meet some other kids at the park. The last time he was seen alive was around 10 in the morning on my security camera. The last few seconds of the video had him walking around the side of the house and out of sight. The day he went missing, the cistern was full again. But we had a massive thunderstorm in the afternoon with lots of rain. To be truthful, that night I prayed that it was just a fluke, that 2 people had gone missing on the same day the cistern filled more than I did for the kid's safe return. The missing boy really hurt my family. The town thought I had done it. I was pegged a killer. Rumors flew that I was a serial killer, and I was throwing bodies in the well to hide them. It wasn't long after that when my wife decided to leave. The stress was too much for her. Once the divorce was finalized, I decided to sell the house and move as far away as I could. That was the night I met him. I was in the basement looking for moving boxes when I heard running water. I went into the back room and the cistern was filling through one of the old pipes. I looked up from the water and saw him for the first time. He was dripping wet and crawling up from the well. He moved in quick, twitchy movements. As he got closer, I realized this was a person at one time. Hunched over, he still stood about 6.5 feet tall. Upright, he must have been 7 feet or more. His arms were long and spindly, ending in sharp pointing bones protruding from his decaying skin, clicking on the floor. His body was a pale gray, and the rotting waterlogged flesh was falling off as he moved towards me. As he got closer, his bottom jaw split, opening outwards as well as down, exposing rows of teeth and a low growl. His eyes, just sockets, but he reacted to light and movement as if he could see me. We can make this arrangement work, you and I. I can offer you things no mortal could dream of. Dimensions beyond anything you could comprehend. Rifts where you are king. And the things you keep locked away in your mind will all come to be. Your very own world to rule, where even death cannot stop you, and you wield absolute power. But I need a little help from you first. I'd suggest you take this offer without much fuss. The other options are not so kind. I don't remember much after that. That was 15 years ago. Since then, I've been feeding him, usually twice a year. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. But in a strange way, we've become closer as I get pushed further away from society. I've never been charged with murder, but the town knows something isn't right in my house. He's my only companion now. I almost wish he would come more often. I hunt all across the country. Problem is, he only feeds on the living. I've become numb to it at this point. I try and pick offerings that no one will miss. The lowest of the low. The more he feeds, the more power he lends me, and the better I get at hunting. But it's changing me as well. Eventually, when he's strong enough, I believe that he will uphold his end of the bargain, and we will rule together. You know, maybe I don't want to leave after all. June 12th, 2007. I remember it well. I woke up soaking wet on the basement floor. The room had a lingering scent of rotting, waterlogged flesh. I could hear the water dripping from the pipes into the cistern. I sat up slowly. I wasn't sure if he was still there. I started thinking back about what had happened. Was he real? Did that actually happen? Those were the kind of questions I was asking myself while I sat there dripping wet and confused. I I was under a lot of stress at the time, with the divorce and the whole community thinking I was a murderer. Maybe I made it all up, or had fallen and hit my head. I tried to convince myself that it was a dream, but the water running down my face was a clear reminder that it wasn't. Then I slowly realized that I wasn't afraid. After seeing what I seen, one would assume some sort of shock or fear would be a normal response. But for some reason, I felt more comfortable than ever. I felt protected and at home. I slowly stood up and started making my way towards the well. Each step felt like an eternity. I wanted to know. I needed to know what was in that well. My feet felt like cinder blocks as I made my way towards the century-old stone well. It was in the back corner of the basement, under the kitchen, probably 2 or 3 feet in diameter, maybe more. I'm bad at estimating. I must have stood at the threshold for an hour before I was brave enough to look down. It was a 10-foot drop to the water line. It was too dark to see into the water, but staring into the well brought this overwhelming feeling of comfort and warmth in the otherwise cool, damp basement. The water had a sort of hypnotic shimmer. The little bits of light that made it into the well seemed as if they were trapped and danced around the rocks and gave movement to still water. That's when I realized maybe whatever is in that well isn't bad. Maybe if I helped him, he would help me. I'm not one to believe in magic or ghost or any of that paranormal stuff, but I saw what I saw, and whatever he was, he could have killed me if he wanted to. But there I was, alive and looking into the well. Somehow, I knew what I had to do. He needed to feed, and it was my job to bring him a meal. Everything from that point on was robotic. I went upstairs and changed, found my truck keys, and headed towards the local butcher. Halfway to the butcher's, I realized that buying a full pig, when the whole town thinks I'm some sort of sick serial killer, might not be the best idea. I couldn't buy a gun. I didn't have a license. And one of the first questions they ask you is if you've been divorced recently. I needed a way to bring him a human-sized meal without raising any red flags around town. The clarity was incredible. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was on the highway. I was headed towards the next town, where I knew I could buy a hunting bow without a license, and without anyone knowing who I am. It was around then when I realized time was different. The hour-long drive felt instant. I don't really remember being in the hunting store, and before I knew it, I was back home learning how to use a compound bow. I set up a target, took 50 steps back, and just like that, bullseye. I did it over and over. It didn't feel like I was moving my hands or fingers. My vision was crisp and clear, and I was laser focused on the task at hand. Was it luck, or was he truthful when he said he could give me powers beyond anything I could imagine? And this was just a taste. I don't know. That night I didn't sleep. I was restless and alert. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the well and the lights dancing on the water. If I let myself drift off, I could hear whispers and sounds, but I wasn't able to understand the words. At 4 in the morning, I realized I couldn't sleep, and I knew what I had to do. I had to bring him a meal. He wouldn't let me sleep if I didn't uphold my end of the bargain. I took my bow and walked out of the house towards the trail into the woods at the back of my property. Deer were common and people-sized. Seeing that's what he had been feeding on, I figured it would be a good start. I'd never been hunting before, but I must be a fast learner because I blacked out as soon as I seen a doe resting in some tall grass near the tree line. I have some shaky memories of dragging the deer back to the house and into the basement, somehow getting it up and into the cistern. When I realized what was going on, I was sitting on the basement floor, covered in dirt and deer blood. All I could do then was wait. I had lost track of time and couldn't understand the numbers on my watch. I knew it was time, but the shapes didn't have meaning anymore. I was tired, but I didn't want to leave. I desperately wanted to meet him again. I had questions, and I knew he had answers. My eyes started getting heavy, and I was drifting in and out of consciousness when I heard the sounds of running water and splashing from the well. I couldn't move. It was like sleep paralysis. I watched as he emerged from the well. The same twitchy movements, the same eyeless sockets, surveying the room. The bones protruding from his arms clicked on the cistern walls as he evaluated the offering I had brought him. His spine stuck out from the skin on his back and had spike-like protrusions that would move in and out as he hunched over and stood up. The muscles in the back of his thighs were mostly exposed, and his legs were small compared to the rest of his misshaped body. He then turned his attention to me. I could hear his voice inside my head. "This will do for this time, but you have more to learn if we are to make this arrangement permeate. The flesh satiates my hunger, but the essence of life is what fuels my power. You will learn in time, my child. So willing, you will make me proud. When the time is right, you will bring me the next meal. You will know. Do not worry. When the time is right, you will know. Rest, my child. You will need strength." Laying motionless on the floor, I could hear him snapping bones and tearing meat from the carcass. He sounded happy, and that brought me joy. I don't know how long I was asleep after that, but it was the most peaceful rest I've ever had. I had an overwhelming feeling that I had found purpose in life.